Welcome, everyone, to the Solid Responder Podcast, where we share stories from first responders and talk about the past, the present, and the future in disaster response. Solid Responder highlights key issues in emergency response, exploring, engaging, and educating the emergency response community with featured guests from diverse all-hazard emergency response disciplines. Listen in as leading experts in the field tell their personal stories of dramatic and dangerous moments, the lessons that they learned, and how their skills and leadership were put to the test. Listen in as we talk about taking good medicine to bad places. I'm your host, Joe Hernandez, and the Solid Responder Podcast, squared away, right away. Hello again, and welcome everyone to the Solid Responder Podcast, episode 2, where we're going to continue to share stories from first responders. You know, I've been excited all week thinking about this particular episode where we're going to be traveling north. We're going to go to a response community all the way into Canada, where we're going to be spending some time with the next guest, a solid responder and hero himself, a good friend, Chief Dave Bain, who is with Canada Task Force 2. He is also serves with the City of Red Deer Emergency Services. And I first got to meet Dave back in the early 2000s when he was taking a medical team specialist course at TEACS in my early days as an instructor. And I had that pleasure of meeting him and a few other folks from Canada Task Force 2, which was really interesting. And I'm just going to let him tell you more about himself, and we're going to explore this Canada's urban search and rescue system. And I'm just as excited as hopefully everyone that's listening is going to find out tonight. Dave,
awesome.
Thank you.
Well, thanks for having me. I've been super excited to do this. This is, maybe I don't have much going on in my life, but this is super exciting. So it's pretty cool. Let's see. I'll give you background on me. So I'll start off with the Canadian. So in Canada, we call it a heavy urban search and rescue. And I think not that there's a difference, but just our government has gone to not great lengths, I would say, but to lengths to delineate between a heavy, a medium, and a light urban search and rescue. Probably no different than your FEMA teams, your state teams, stuff like that. We don't have a lot of, so for example, embedded in a major city, a heavy urban search and rescue component. And so they had to kind of define what that would be in Canada. So our team is one of 6 that are classified as a heavy urban search and rescue team. And our team started back in the early 2000s, right after 9/11. Some of the funding had come out, and the Calgary Fire Department decided they wanted to kind of jump on board with that. And so the team started with them. And then when I started in 2008, it was the first external class, if you will, that joined the team. Up till then, it was all just members of the Calgary Fire Department's technical rescue team or heavy rescue team. And so there was, what they really did was targeted firefighter paramedics in and around the city of Calgary. A lot of our municipalities were cross-trained, so no different than my job here in Red Deer is we're completely cross-trained. And in fact, when I was on the floor here, one day I would be on the ambulance, the next day I would be on the engine. And if I needed to jump on the medic because they needed a medic there, then that's what it was. And I absolutely loved that part of the job. So, I always make the joke, 2 jobs, 1 paycheck. What can you love about it? So with the team though, at first we had some funding kind of hiccups along the way because we started off with what was called JEP grants. That was the Joint Emergency Preparedness Plan grants for the government at the time. And post 9/11, as I'm sure it was in the States, there was lots of money thrown at lots of things. A lot of the fire departments, my own included, were able to get extra training, extra equipment on what you would call WMD. We call it CBRNE up here. So chemical, biological, radioactive, nuclear, and explosive. So we had tons of that kind of training. And that we started to buy things from that JEP grant for our team. But then the funding kind of froze and we had to switch gears. And so what we did was our provincial government stepped up in Alberta and said, you know what, we'll help to fund that team. So we're all excited about that. But the kind of caveat to it is you can't just be a heavy urban search and rescue team, because we don't go up the door for that kind of stuff all the time, right? We're still waiting for our first major HUSAR deployment. But what we've done is now become the provincial disaster team as well. And so that's really dovetailing to us going out the door more. We've major deployments for wildfires, flooding, a lot of incident management team deployments. I was just up in Whitehorse, Yukon for major flooding there a few weeks ago, stuff like that. So that's kind of the history. So in Canada, 6 teams. We've got one in Halifax, a new team that started in Montreal, team in Toronto, team in Manitoba, us here in Alberta, and then a team in Vancouver. And so they're spread out. Our biggest challenge is geographics. I always get a chuckle when I watch the FEMA stuff and they go, oh, we drove across 4 states to prepare for a hurricane. I could drive for days and days and not get out of Alberta. So
Wow.
we've got geography to deal with. So that's kind of the Canadian system. That's some of the stuff we face. Me personally, I've been in emergency services for about 26, 27 years, been with the city Red Deer for 17 years. And I've been in the training division or training branch for the last 6. And I've been the chief training officer for just coming on the last year. So busy guy, lots going on, but that's how most of us live. So yeah.
Fantastic. It sounds basically just like we started here in the States, getting funding together, being able to be nominated, blessed, going from a local resource to a state resource and a federal resource as they grew the FEMA system, because it didn't start with the 28 teams that they do now have.
Right.
It grew from there. And teams still looking for that slot. Is it going to keep growing? Is it going to get smaller? We did see a few years ago a team get eliminated due to several issues, and one of the state teams who was prepared, had the equipment and the training, and were just taken and slid into that slot, and that was New Jersey Task Force 1 coming into the system. So pretty much is the same. And what we see, almost like you, probably provincial wise, state wise, we're seeing more movement within the state teams than sometimes we see in the FEMA teams, just because they're easier to move and less budget is involved. And what the mission is, it's easier to modulate them into that system, even though FEMA now has started those mission ready packages, i.e. for the water mission ready packages. Same thing with the CBRNE, a WMD mission ready package to be able to get those out the door, even a medical mission ready package. So the water being the biggest one, it started after Katrina. So I think that's fantastic. And I'm glad to see that there's been a lot going on, and I want to hear about your training and what's going on, because I know that you guys have a robust team of pretty much mirrored, I think, what the states have done, correct?
Yeah. So what we did when we started the HUSAR program here is we pretty much mirrored everything that we saw FEMA doing. And I mean, like I've said before to people, is that the thing about FEMA, you guys have a disaster season, right? Every year you practice deployments, demobs, you're able to fine tune and tweak things, because you're getting the repetition. We don't get the repetition as much. It's taken us, again, 12, 13 years I've been on the team, half a dozen deployments, and not all of those were big deployments. Some of those are the smaller, like you said, the mission ready package. We send, we've had water deployments. We've had something as simple as we need to set up some tents to protect the crime scene for the local police. Well, that's still going through the check-in process, getting us repetition, setting up tents. So even though it's super small scale, it's good practice and training for us. One of the things, like I had mentioned, one of the things we're seeing a lot more of, and we're starting to see it mimic, like you guys have done in the States, we've started creating incident management teams strategically located. And again, because of our geography, to get an IMT somewhere. So again, we were called from Calgary to go up to Whitehorse, Yukon, which is about a 12, 14-hour drive, or 20-hour drive, I guess, if you went straight. And that's just because we were the closest IMT to go to that. And so we're starting to look at what resources we need strategically placed. The interesting part about Canada is our population base is all within mostly within 6 hours of the American border. But, we go all the way up to the North Pole as far as Canadian geography. So, population centered on the south, but lots of, we still got people living in the north. So that geography can sometimes play a challenge.
Interesting. And you guys have been to some events, wildfires across the Canada, as well as flooding and snow events that have and flooding that in Calgary itself that were historic. And you mentioned North Pole, and when you're trying to take good medicine into bad places, and you're dealing with temperatures like the North Pole, that's something that we've just never, at least this flatlander and this warm population down towards the Caribbean and South Florida, has never really experienced. And I don't think we could ever layer enough to stay warm enough.
Yeah.
And then even if we could, our equipment is not set up and geared for that environment. And so for that reason, I want to hear how you guys have dealt with that. I know that we've been asking manufacturers and vendors to think about that, to open their ears, to be more R&D into what we do and how we train, and say, hey, we got the better mousetrap. We've got a way to keep things warm, or we've got a way to keep things cold, because I can't imagine taking something out in sub-zero temperature and trying to get it to stay warm.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it's interesting. So up here, it's not just from a HUSAR perspective, just an EMS perspective of, excuse me, how do you respond to a motor vehicle accident when it is 30 below Celsius and you're putting in IV fluids? Well, those IV fluids are cold, relatively speaking, and we all know how bad cold and trauma is. And so, those are some of, in old days, tricks of the trade. I put a couple IV bags under my armpits, under my coat to keep them warm, because that's what I'm going to put my patient. Little things like that. One of the big things when we came back from doing med spec down in Teeks was we started talking about, okay, how are we going to do this? Because we were building our medical specialist course and our medical specialist program. And so just to give background from our team, we originally sent 3 physicians down to take that course. They came back like, oh, it was a fantastic course. It was awesome. But they didn't have the capacity to actually now build a program. So then 3 medics, myself, one of them, 3 of us went down, took the course with you, Joe, and a bunch of others. And when we came back, now we were tasked with not only building our medical team, but also building the Canadian version of the disaster medical specialist course. And one of the first conversations we had is, I think we need to figure out cold weather. And so things like, how do we transport our drugs and not have them freeze? How do we how do we deal with equipment that might become brittle if it's left on the side of a softwall trailer that's going down the highway when it's 40 below Celsius? Things like that, where, and it's interesting, you talk about being from Florida, you're probably dealing with the other side of it, I'm assuming, where it's super hot and you're trying to make sure things are cool. Well, 8 months out of the year up here in Canada, it's cold enough that we have to consider those things. So, you mentioned manufacturers. Those are, you want to talk about a market up here in Canada. Well, keeping IV fluids warm, bags or insulation or heaters to keep medications warm, things just meant for transport and transit, right? Those are some of the challenges we face, not to mention just winter, like footing and all that other stuff. Like I'm sure that our deployment cache, personal deployment cache, is a lot more than down the States, because we literally have one bag that's a cold weather bag. It has cold weather boots, cold weather gloves, cold weather jacket, all that stuff. And so then you start looking, okay, well, what do I need to take? What's the weather going to be like? And I mean, in Alberta, it changes at like drop of a hat. So that's the challenges of being north of 49. So
hey, training, preparation, and response, and you guys
100%.
have it pretty much under wrap. From my understanding, is that thought of being able to pack that extra bag to be able to go on that particular specific deployment.
Yeah.
Hats off to you guys on that response. I remember early teaching a course up at the REACT Center a few years ago, and it was during the mid-March, and the facilities director said, we can cover the facility. It's up in Wisconsin. We can cover it because there's still snow on the ground and some things are frozen, and we can pump heat inside the rubble pile. And I said, wait a minute, time out. This is not something that we're used to. If we have any kind of water in there, it's going to stay water. I've never had the idea that, this stuff could be frozen ice inside those pipes. And I said, let's not pump heat in it. And what a learning experience we could get from that, not only just from the Southern teams, but everywhere that just aren't exposed to being outside for that long period of time. And so instead of doing 30, 45-minute rotations, we were limiting them to 15 minutes just from the exposure that the responder was getting into trying to get into the trap victims that were inside there. And it was phenomenal. So there's so much to learn from you all in our training curriculum that's going on right now. We're changing that. We're adding a few things and eliminating a few things. We put some on computer-based training to get rid of the crush syndrome that was happening on our bottoms as we sat in the chairs and just did PowerPoint after PowerPoint. And we added a few more skills stations and a few more scenarios. Disaster Medical Solutions is going to be doing a class in Ocala. It's a FEMA equivalent course. And if you want to get out of the cold that first week of December coming in, you're more than welcome to come down and present to the FEMA group that's going to be down there, and a lot of state urban search and rescue folks just like you're going to have from local provinces that attend that class. We would love to hear what you guys have shared there. We just added a few components to that, but it's been interesting, and you guys have been doing a lot of exercises. So I want to hear about that too. And one of them was, I loved seeing the cohesion of seeing FEMA and the Canadian USAR system getting together, USAR, and doing an exercise together that replicated, I guess, a 7.7 earthquake that would have put a zipper up across the middle of the entire continent and split us in half, which really would have made us a south and a north shared as opposed to an east and a west. So kind of let's depend on each other's nation. How did that go?
Well, first of all, the training facilities and the quality of that exercise was just unbelievable. And it's kind of funny. I was a little jealous in that exercise because I was stuck in the command tent. I always have this joke of I better never deploy and my uniform be clean at the end. And that's the rescue medical guy in me. But I can't even tell you how much I learned there. Like, and the fantastic point, other than just the realism of the scenarios and the input from the exercise controllers, and it was just all top notch and phenomenal. But I think the most valuable piece to that is exactly like you said, is now we're working with FEMA teams. We're embedded with FEMA teams. So if we had to roll out the door to assist the US or vice versa, that interoperability piece that we talk about in emergency response, it's there, and we know what to expect. And that exercise, we had teams from Australia there as well, and they've now fostered friendships and networking that we are in contact with Australian teams, with UK teams, to talk about. So one of the things in Canada that we're pursuing as a program across the country is INSAROG as a certification piece, not necessarily to deploy internationally, but to meet a certain standard. And that networking piece is just, you can't put a price on that, to be able to pick up the phone and say, hey, I have a question. And, my hat's off to the FEMA program. A little while ago for my home department, we were trying to figure out how we were going to allow people to go away for deployment, because almost my whole chief officer team in my department are now part of our Canada Task Force 2 team. So how do we all leave? and no one's here to run the asylum, so to speak.
Sure.
And so we were coming up with kind of like your red, white, and blue. Now it's Canada, so it's a red and white rotation. But I was tasked with calling all around and finding out what other task force teams do. And I can't say enough about talking to task force leaders and members down in the States that dropped everything they were doing and sharing information. And this is what we did. This worked well. This didn't work well. Just that camaraderie, that brother and sisterhood is just unbelievable. But the exercise itself was, couldn't have been more timely, because and you have to forgive me, but a couple of years ago, you guys had a super strong hurricane season, and it was the first time Public Safety Canada actually offered up our HUSAR program for deployment. And I can't tell you what a big step that was, because before they were, well, no, you guys are never going to leave the country. We need you here. But the fact that we're now saying, you know what, we think we're good enough to offer that outside the country is just, for us, that was a real watershed litmus test kind of thing for us. So.
Wow, fantastic. I mean, just to see that there's a lot of similarities. You come from the same beginnings that I did with that cross-trained dual role IAFF type fire rescue service. I wear one hat one day and the next day I wear the other one. And sometimes I don't want to put the other one on because it's just too nice wearing the other one, and you miss that. And it just is what it is. And I think that transition into USAR is easy. And then when now you're a witness of it, that when you see a brother from another mother, of being from either one state, one province, and or one country difference, it's easy to assimilate from one team into another, and to see that they were doing that and offering themselves up for suggestions, advice, consulting, whatever you need. Let us know what kind of list you need and we'll send it to you. And we've done some of that with people needing MOUs, wondering how are we going to get medications for our task force without laying the money up front and have it organized. And so developing, MOUs with hospitals, and then being able to pull that resource out at the time of a deployment, even though you're in a 2 to 4 hour window, and all of that becomes an issue. How is your issues with pharmaceuticals and with physicians in the USAR system in Canada? It probably is close to the same that we're having here in the US, and some talks we're having now.
Yeah, the pharmaceutical piece was another thing that we had to work out when we came back from MedSpec, was exactly that, is how do we get our cache full of medications and they're ready to go, so we're out the door and it's not slowing us down, but at the same time, we don't want, $100,000 worth of, that's Canadian dollars, by the way, $100,000 of medication that all expires all the same month, same year. Right. And so we had MOUs, same as you, that we talked to local hospitals that, hey, you know what, when our stuff's getting close to expiry, can we trade it in? What we're lucky for here in Alberta is that the government administers healthcare here. And so what I mean by that is Alberta Health Services, which is a government organization, they run all of our health services here in the province. So what's nice is that they're a stakeholder, and they got skin in the game for us to respond, because we're supporting the government. So they've been really good with those kinds of understandings and supporting us for stuff like that. The physician one's an interesting one, because we've had one, it's interesting. We had one core physician who's been on the team back when it was just Calgary Fire. And what's interesting was he was a physician before, kind of got a little bored and woke up one day and said, I always wanted to be a firefighter. So he literally went to Calgary Fire, went through rookie school, became a Calgary firefighter, worked on 9 Heavy, which is the heavy rescue company back then. And then, realized I can still make a lot of money as a doc. So then he pulled back and kind of became the medical director, everything else. He's our original OG medical director on our team. So we're really lucky. He's our core, like he's been there the whole time, and he keeps trying to recruit docs. But what we get is a lot of turnover, because the docs come and, emergency medicine physicians, and as they do, they come for a period of time, then they move on to other things and other opportunities. So that constant turnover is difficult, and especially when we make our docs go through MedSpec. That's a difficult one too, is to ask a physician to clear their schedule for a whole week when they're a lot of times in residency. It's a difficult ask. And so we have that challenge. What we're getting a lot now is the University of Calgary and the University of Alberta in Edmonton, their medical programs have disaster medicine fellowships. So we're getting physicians that are specializing in disaster medicine. What better place than a disaster team to come and volunteer? So we're starting to pick those opportunities. I was just we're running a medical specialist course in the new year, in end of March, and we were on a planning meeting last night, and I think we have 4 or 5 physicians on that call. So we're in good shape, but again, it can change, right? So we do struggle sometimes making sure that we've got the support we can go out the door, but um, yeah, I mean, like anybody else, we have those challenges.
I think that's great. I know that we have some fellowship programs here in the United States as well. We've had some of those fellows who are transitioning, and the same thing, they get credit hours for taking some type of disaster. Either it's the medical team specialist course, or they take wilderness medicine or hyperbaric
Mhm.
medicine. And University of Indiana and George Washington University are doing those. I believe there's another one in Texas doing the same thing, and it's great. I think it's a fantastic program, and we've also suffering the same thing with some teams, either not having the physician, so not being able to go out the door, or not actually telling the truth and going out the door without the physician. So that's a
Yeah.
whole nother story of, really, that's not nice to the emergency management and or to the responding community that's in need. But the talk of sharing physicians between task forces, a task force that may not be up on rotation,
Mhm.
could lend that physician out to that particular other task force that needs to go out. The credentials are all the same. He's only traveling from one state to another. And within the Stafford Act and that disaster, it opens up his practice pretty much across the country during that time. And it's interesting to see that we're not the only ones. Of course, it's a healthcare issue, and as we come from that dual role cross trained, and we enjoy being in those confined spaces and off those areas and being out in that extreme and for that long period of time. It changes as we get older, of course. It's harder to find that physician to do it. You guys got lucky in finding one that wanted to go back the other way. We have one that teaches with us that started as the EMT and fire and then went all the way to physician. So it's
Very
great to
cool.
see that. We've got our medical director for Disaster Medical Solutions, and one of my best friends and colleagues. She's the director at Holtz Children's Hospital. She's a pediatric intensivist. She's been on the team since 1994, and it's hard to keep her out of a hole every time.
Yeah.
And she's still on the team, and recently responded to the Surfside building collapse in Miami Beach and to Hurricane Ida into the Louisiana area. And they've got to tell her, Doc, could you slow down? Because she's that way. But not every physician is that way. And hats off to those that want to do this, because we do need them. We need them for certain procedures. I
Yeah.
had one at one time say, why are you all teaching particular advanced procedures that they can't do in the normal day job, quote unquote?
Yeah.
And so I wanted to understand, and Doc, would you just go a little bit further and let us know what you mean? And he said, well, a open um, thoracotomy, for
Yeah.
instance.
Yeah.
You're also talking about a surgical crike.
Mhm.
You're also talking about, of course, the possibility of an amputation.
Mhm.
And it happened to be an emergency room physician asking those questions, and I was, of course, the other procedures being different than an amputation. And I said, Doc, with all due respect, that amputation only falls in the category of a surgeon, so we're kind of all out of that. But in
Yeah.
the event that we have a rolled over bus or a rolled over cement truck or a train that derailed, and we don't have access to a trauma surgeon out of that center, and we have an emergency room physician, and we have a paramedic that has taken the time to come out and take these advanced courses, the same thing I heard you say that you guys are teaching in that med spec class, the amputations, wouldn't
Yeah.
that be better to have on scene than any other scrub nurse or anyone that hasn't seen that type of an event? And by the way, the commander on that scene is still the fire chief that's, or a commander battalion chief that's on that scene. Even though you're a higher level of education, being on the medical level, we still fall under that jurisdiction. So it's really interesting to see that, and we're kind of all the same and falling under that. Um, it's going to be interesting to hear how you guys have transitioned into the world of, i.e., ketamine. I think we learned
Mhm.
a lot from you guys
Yeah.
early on in ketamine. That was not an acceptable practice. Still kind of is debated even in some agencies. Some medical directors don't want it, but we have learned a lot. So much that it became even a debate during an amputation procedure in 2010 in Haiti, just
Mhm.
because of the availability of tertiary care. There was none. And so what were we going to deal with? A person who
Now
was
what?
on, yes. And thank you for
Yeah.
giving us that education on that medication and at
Oh
least
yeah. Yeah.
laxing that up for us.
Yeah, it is interesting. We've had those same conversations about what if we had to roll out the door without a physician? It just, we got to get out the door, we got to go. And then, it's conversations, well, do we patch in a local physician? But then a local physician's not familiar with the use of our program, just like you said, if we said, hey, I'm on scene with this, and I think we need to do an amputation, that, I can hear the crickets now on the phone as the doc's going, you can't do that. So, it's even just making people aware of our capabilities. And, I don't know if I've said it, but I'll make sure that I say it. The team I'm on is the most phenomenal group of people that I've ever met. I truly consider them my family. And, there's not one of them that wouldn't go the extra mile for someone. But at the same time, liability wise, as a team, as a system, as a program, we don't want to put people in the position where, life or death, career or not. And so, we've slowly been trying to work out some of that stuff, but the landscape changes. And so the goalposts move. And, we had the conversation. So for example, our team, when they originally created it, was in anticipation of a major earthquake happening in British Columbia. And we always, this sounds terrible, but what happens when Vancouver falls in the ocean? Because that's where the earthquake's going to be.
Mhm.
And so their team will be out of play. So we would be responding. And so the question is, well, now because in Canada, each province has different healthcare control and governance. So now how does an Alberta paramedic, that amputation, for example, is outside of our normal scope of practice, but now how do we go to British Columbia and do that? So same conversations, like
And
I always make the joke, same issues, different patch.
yeah,
So
interesting. And that's the same thing we said, and why they were set up the same reason. If we lost now the grade 8, which we call them the 8 teams out in
Yep.
California, Utah is not only going to have beachfront property, but they're going to be first in on a disaster because of that fault line that exists, and then the Andre fault line that exists up the center, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah.
And I love that you keep mentioning not only the task force itself as a system, but also the province itself and the assistance from other teams smaller within the province. And we got to see that in the south at the Surfside building collapse in Miami Beach, where it happened to fall right into the lap of 2 federal teams that were right there when it happened. And they had the resources of being a large fire rescue department with all the resources, having all those big cities around them, and then even having the equipment that the federal government had supplied them, millions of dollars worth of equipment and supplies to be able to do this heavy extrication. And then we have an additional 6 teams, so we have a total of 8 teams within the state, the other 6 being state assets, maybe not as heavily equipped. But what we have done and what's been really good is, I believe you mentioned the same thing, is the training is trying to maintain the same standards. And we're going to continue, hopefully, in that same path, so that when one of those members happens to integrate with another member from another county within the state, but doesn't know that brother from the other mother because they don't operate in the same areas nor with the same protocols, can kind of just intermingle just because the training's been the same. And you just mentioned it with the advanced procedures that are going on. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
The goal of our medical specialist program, since we came back and looked at developing, was creating the Canadian national standard based on what we learned. And our goal was always, okay, other 5 teams, send us your medical staff, and or your medical members, and we're all going to be on the same page.
Awesome.
And that goalpost moves. Those, that's still my personal goal. I've been the lead for that course program since we came back, so whatever, 10 years. And that's always been my goal, is to see a course where I look out and there's members from 18 or there's 6 teams and whatever. So we're still working towards it, but COVID didn't help. But that's our goal, is that we're all teaching the same thing, speaking the same language. So exactly like you said, we can take a medic from Montreal, and other than the French English issue, but when I hand them a eye gel, they know what an eye gel is. When they hand me whatever, I know what that is, right? That should be the ultimate goal for anything like this.
Of course. With our dialect in South Florida, they say the same thing. They say, "Hey, what's going on with the accent? We thought you guys," and they keep coming in. But fantastic, and I love what you mentioned about the red and white. Yay, Canada! Fantastic, and that support of having two teams. And I know that I talked about it with Michael Lay from Maryland Task Force One, who was one of the first in at the Pentagon Trade Center, and one of the big task force members from him, Carr, along with his wife, and did a family support and started this family support. And so when red is out and white stays at home, we've got to deal with those issues of white staying at home. And is that member going to say, "Hey, man, every time you guys go out the door, it just happens to be that white stays home, and I've been doing this stuff for 10 years and I haven't gone out the door. You know what? I'm packing my bags. You can have them. I'm off the team." And we're having the same thing. And so there is a what we call a complex PTSD outside of our normal PTSD of our job. We do it, but we go home and we're with significant others and our kids and, our wives, our husbands. Yet when we're on a deployment, it's a longer period of time. And so we've got that. But those that stay behind, the members that don't get, that prepared, that did all the education, that don't get to go, that have a value resource why we're going out the door to help while we're gone. And at the same time, when we get back, how can they help? What can they do? And let alone, we haven't even spoken about the families, the spouses and the children and what they go through. And even our towns, knowing that they've lost a member of the response community that's there for their own population. And now we are helping someone else, and they love that part of it. And they love being an assistant for that, but it still creates some type of a wave factor. We saw children during 9/11 drawing pictures of people jumping out of buildings and buildings on fire. So that affected them, especially if their father or mother were part of that response team. What's going on over there in Canada with these situations?
Well, so we don't have the same depth of resources, if you will, that you guys have in the States. We don't have a 3 deep team like some of the FEMA teams. So we're lucky in the sense that when the call comes, the majority of the teams going out the door, or at least the majority of the teams responding. Where we bridge these same issues. I know when I started on the team and I had to sit down with my kids and explain to them, okay, so daddy's on this team. They were young. Daddy's on this rescue team. And it was funny because we used to watch Rescue Heroes when they were young. And so that's the analogy I use. I'm like, this is a team like Billy Blazes. This is like Rescue Heroes. And when there's a disaster, we go and help people. And so at first they thought it was the coolest thing in the world. They're all excited until one day my youngest son saw, and I can't remember if it was 9/11 footage. I don't think it was, but there was an earthquake and they saw collapsed buildings and everything else. And suddenly he was preoccupied with, well, what if you get trapped in one of those buildings? It became real for him. And, I, in my geekdom of just being super keen about, I'm going to go do medical rescue work and all this, forgot how it would run through in his mind. So had to sit down and explain things about how, the team makes sure that daddy's being as safe as possible. And I got all my brothers and sisters that take care of me, no different than I talked to when I started being a firefighter. One of the things we did early on our team was what we call a backlink. And I don't know if you guys have something similar, but backlink, what it is we've got some members that are actually on our org chart, and they staff a link from the field or from site back to our family back in Calgary in Alberta. And so our family members get updates through email. They can call at any time and say, hey, what's going on? I was up thinking about what Dave's doing, blah, blah, blah. And they'll give them real-time updates. Obviously, without the graphic details, but, the team is there. They're operating. Everybody's safe. There's been no injuries. Everyone's doing really well, that kind of stuff. And then the other thing that we've done is check-ins. So, and this is still a work in progress, but, trying to do, you get a check-in within a couple of days after you come back from a deployment. One of the ones they try to do is they won't call me. They'll make sure to call my wife. So they'll call when I'm at work. They'll call my wife and say, "How is Dave? Have you noticed anything?" Because as we all know, we'll go for months, weeks, months, years, and not realize there's a change in us. But our family does. They notice right away. And so that's what'll happen. How's he sleeping? How's whatever, right? And then follow up that way. And now, even again with our medical specialist course, one of the areas that I'm preparing for is a mental health piece. So, like you had mentioned it, in day-to-day EMS work and rescue work, we talk about CISD, critical incident stress debrief, stuff like that. Well, for USAR deployment, now we're talking extended incident stress, and that's the same but different. And so we integrate that into our course, into our training as well. And that makes a big difference, because now you're able to anticipate at day 10, day 11, oh, now I'm starting to see I'm becoming more irritable and I'm becoming short with people or whatever. So we're trying the best we can. We have a bunch of different programs up here that we use in the emergency services world, and we use in our task force team as well. One is called the Road to Mental Readiness, and it was developed by the Canadian military to prepare Canadian soldiers to deploy to the Middle East, because they saw that they weren't mentally prepared for it. And it was such a success, they handed it down for free to emergency services. And so I've been teaching that course for the last couple of years, and just being an instructor has really changed my outlook, because it's all about recognizing signs in you and giving each other the common language. And so those kinds of programs have gone a long way to take down the stigma of mental health. And so we can talk openly about, what, this is bothering me. Whereas before, someone would kind of look at you and, like you had a flaw, or you weren't personally strong. And now we realize, yes, you are. You're just human.
Yeah. Wow. That in itself is a show. I mean, I'd love to have you back on that, just so that we can
Sure.
Push more of that button. You hit my passion. You hit a few other people's passion that I know that are strongly behind that. I love the surveillance of not only coming back weeks later, but not talking to the particular responder, but to the particular responder significant other family member who are now affected by the return of that person, and would more or less give you an honest answer, versus an answer that we have always done within the fire service or the EMS service, is just we know how to deal with certain things and cover it over, because that's the way that we learn how to deal with things. And so I love that, because you figure we go away for that period of time, and so we leave them in charge, and we come back and we try to be in charge, and they're like, wait a minute, time out. You've been away for a little while and you have no idea what's happened. The refrigerator broke. I had to have somebody fix the car because I had two flats, and one of the kids lost a front tooth, and then the car broke down. And it's like, holy Toledo, Murphy's Law, what they call in the United States, something always happens when you're gone.
100%.
And we've even gone to the point of saying, maybe let's start talking about having families do power of attorneys, just because if I've got to pay a bill and you for some reason didn't put your wife on that bill, she can't pay it. And it's like, are you kidding me? No, it's just under your name, sir. It's not you and her. And I'm like, oh. And so something as simple in the military, like you said. So I love seeing what they have done in passing that down. 9/11, the World Trade Center attacks, the Pentagon attacks, September the 11th, 2001, changed a lot of things, started the program, the ball rolling for the program to start happening within Canada. It lifted our programs. We had teams that responded now for the first time on that event. So they had done some training, but never really went out the door, as you said, to a major incident, i.e. it was Tennessee Task Forces One's first episode to go out the door, and New Mexico's first real big event. So it was really big for them, and it changed our kids too, just like you mentioned, that it really changed and affected your children, particularly your older one, in saying, wait a minute, now that earthquake could affect dad or mom should something happen. The September 11th issue happened when my three children were all in high school. So I had a freshman to a senior, and I remember saying goodbye to them. not knowing that within a few years my two sons would be joining the U.S. military and trying to do something, maybe not as a responder, but as a protector, but as a response into this being, again, what we've learned to do, or giving back in society as opposed to taking, and how we've raised our kids and how they've seen us function. You reaching the levels as you have, from firefighter to captain to chief to training chief to being the USAR coordinator, to being able to put this thing together and then reaching out to others and always having an open mind. I mean, it's fantastic. And those, I'm getting ready to start something else. I just in it, writing in a blog, and I'd love to hear thoughts in it. Just calling it trauma timeout, just taking some trauma time out from our lives. I'm getting ready to go on a vacation with my wife, 40 years, and going to really enjoy that time. And I enjoyed talking to another gentleman, Chris Fields from Oklahoma City Fire Department, who was one of the first in there at that major event way back in 1995, so long ago, and Chris still married and functioning with his children, and part of an organization called Trauma Behind the Badge. And he's that big photograph that everybody remembers of a firefighter with his coat on and his helmet on, holding a deceased child that they had pulled out from the daycare of the Oklahoma City bombing and the terrorist attack. So it was being that young on the job and having those incidents. We know that they don't always have good outcomes. I mean, we're seeing divorce rates going up 800% over there. We're now seeing in the States, and I don't know how Canada's doing, but we are losing more firefighter personnel not on the job. We're losing them away from the job. We're now increased over 30% of folks doing it even at the station. So they're
Got a
taking
couple episodes of that. Yeah.
they're taking their lives versus the job taking their lives during a call, a fire, an accident. So
Yeah.
self-inflicting. And so I'm glad to hear that you guys are doing something about it. I would love to hear more about it. And hats off. I mean, I can't thank you enough, and really would like to get back on there sometime in the future, and possibly someone else, and see how we can share information. I'd love to see what Canada's doing, and probably have a lot better outcome than we do. For some reason, just hearing when some of the internationals come to the course here, seeing or hearing that they do not have the social issues sometimes that we have with overdoses in the States. The other countries aren't seeing that. And so it seems to be a homeland type of issue here within the States, and we've got to get down to the bottom of it. So, Dave, I can't tell you enough how the people have, myself, learned so much more of Canada's urban search and rescue system. It's so much just like holding up a mirror to a certain degree, just a smaller population and smaller level, but really you guys are doing the same thing we are. And tell me what you think. I'd love to have you back on at a certain time. And
Well, I'd love to. Yeah.
you got it.
You know, our Canadian, like I said, our Canadian system, we look to our family to the south to create a program. And then I think the exciting part for me, because, you know, we took FEMA as our template to build our program. I think the exciting part of the Canadian system now is we're putting more maple leaf on it, right? We're saying, okay, let's take that system. What do we need it for Canada?
Yeah.
So it's not that FEMA's system doesn't work up here, but we want to take FEMA's system and then Canadianize it so that it's functional for us. But at the same time, being able to be interoperable with you guys. So I think it's win-win.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And for those of you that want to get more information on the mental health system, on what is going on, not only with Canada, with the US and abroad, and learn more about Canada's urban search and rescue system, we'll have Chief Bain's information with the show notes that you all can come back to. And we want to thank Chief Dave Bain again. We want to thank the City of Red Deer Emergency Services. We want to thank Canada Task Force 2. We want to thank the country of Canada for letting him stand there and give us information and give the country information. And I'm looking forward to seeing him again, and even seeing him or one of them at the medical specialist course that Disaster Medical Solutions putting on in late November, early December. Dave, have a wonderful night. Thank you again for being that solid responder. You're a hero. You're changing the country. You're making things happen, and obviously you're a good family man as well. And I'm proud to call you a friend. Thank you, brother.
Thank you so much.
You have a great night.